Dawn does not shout. It opens the room with quiet light, and in that soft unveiling there is a question that will not leave you. What if the thing you keep chasing is already within reach, yet you have not learned to place your hand on it from the inside? You have used calendars, habits, apps, courses, new systems that promised certainty, and still your progress feels like mist you cannot quite hold. You work hard, and the world sees motion, yet inside your chest the needle barely moves. There is effort and there is exhaustion. There is knowledge and there is noise. There is desire and there is a door that seems to stay locked. You begin to wonder whether the missing piece is not another tactic, but a throne, an inner seat from which your life can finally be governed. If that thought touches something tender, let it rest. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not late to your own life. Much of what you call failure is simply a nervous system that was trained to run before it was taught to rest, to react before it was taught to rule. The brain's alarm calls for speed. The body obeys with scattered urgency. The soul pays with a low, constant ache. This is not a moral flaw, it is a pattern, and patterns yield to wiser patterns. Practical spirituality meets emotional neuroscience here. When the breath slows, when attention returns to the body, when the prefrontal mind is invited to lead, the storm inside you begins to recognize a shore. Power returns, not as pressure, but as presence. I want you to hear this without any trace of accusation. You have been faithful in effort, yet untrained in governance. You added tasks to a schedule that did not first submit to principle. You chased results without installing the quiet laws that make results inevitable. We were told success is a stack of hacks. We were seldom taught that success is a structure, and structure is built from the inside out. A life ungoverned by its owner becomes governed by moods, by notifications, by the loudest urgency in the room. A life governed at its core, however, moves with a steady authority that does not rise and fall with the day's weather. This is where the ancient voice of Solomon becomes startlingly modern. He was not merely a king with wealth. He was a student of how the inner world shapes the outer kingdom, a careful observer of cause and effect, of seasons and seeds, of the way character builds palaces that talent alone cannot keep. He taught that ruling your spirit is greater than conquering a city, because the city you fail to govern within will sabotage every territory you win without. His wisdom is not a museum piece. It is a living map you can hold in your hands today, a way of arranging your inner furniture so your life can actually carry the weight you keep trying to add to it. There is a hard truth here, and I will hand it to you with gentle hands. Many of us build our days on adrenaline and call it ambition, and the result is a success that wobbles under its own speed. We sprint, then stall. We commit, then collapse. We say yes to everything and watch our focus thin until the work loses its warmth. None of this means you lack what it takes. It means your energy outran your architecture. It means your feelings made promises your principles could not fund. It means your attention was borrowed by noise because your inner gates were left open. This is said without judgment. It is said like a lamp turned on in a room you already own. Let us come back to the body for a moment, because the body is where wisdom lands. Unclench your jaw. Let the shoulders drop away from the ears. Feel the weight of your feet on the ground that has been holding you since the day you learned to stand. Inhale slowly through the nose, hold for a beat, and let the exhale lengthen as if you were dimming a light. That simple act invites your nervous system to choose safety over urgency, and when the body believes it is safe, the mind can finally choose wisely. The spiritual meets the scientific here. A quiet breath is both prayer and protocol, both trust and technique. It opens a small space between impulse and action, and in that space, leadership is born. If you have ever felt condemned by your own efforts, consider this a pardon. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become the one who sits where decisions are born. From that seat, principles replace moods as the rulers of your day. From that seat, your name becomes a promise people can rely on, and favor, the quiet trust of others, begins to multiply your work in ways money never could. From that seat, diligence shrinks from a grim marathon into a timed, humane rhythm that you can keep without wounding yourself. From that seat, discernment becomes a gate that protects your hours and your heart from the subtle theft of good things that are not the right things. This is not theory. This is the daily craftsmanship of a life that is finally arranged to carry its calling. I am speaking to the part of you that already knows this is true, the part that is tired of pushing and secretly longs for a way of moving that feels like clarity and not like combat. You sense that wisdom does not shout. It leans in and names the next right thing. You sense that success, when it is real, makes you more human and not less, more whole and not more hollow. Solomon's pattern whispers the same refrain in many rooms. Inside first, then outside, pillars before paint, favor before finance, the ant's steady path before the hero's one loud leap, the protected gate before the marketplace fills. The refrain is simple and the effect is profound. Arrange your inner world, and your outer world stops resisting you so fiercely. So we begin here, at the threshold where your breath evens out and your attention returns to the present moment, because presence is the doorway to rule. You will not be forced. You will be invited. You will not be shamed. You will be shown. You will not be told to hustle harder. You will be taught to build wiser. The quiet work we are about to do will not burn you out. It will burn away the fog that kept you from seeing what was already yours. There is a key. It has been in your hand longer than you realize, and now, very gently, you will learn how to turn it from the inside. Before we move, allow one thought to settle like new weight on the soul. When the heart sits on its rightful throne, the schedule becomes a servant, the mind becomes a counsel, and the body becomes a faithful ally. This is the success secret nobody tells you because it is not spectacular enough to sell, yet it is sturdy enough to last. Breathe once more, feel the ground. Recognize the quiet authority rising in you, not as noise, but as knowing. From here we proceed, not with more pressure, but with more power, the kind that grows from the center and does not need to announce itself to be real. The inner throne. Rule your spirit before you rule your schedule. There is a familiar ache that visits when the day is full and the harvest is thin, a restless pulse that wonders how so much movement can end in so little fruit. The calendar glows, the inbox hums, the tasks multiply like quicksilver, and yet the deep place inside remains unconvinced. Busy becomes a costume for unfulfilled, and the hours wear that disguise until evening arrives with its quiet questions. In that silence, a simpler truth begins to rise. Effort without inner governance is wind without a sail, loud but directionless, momentary and exhausting. The body runs, the mind races, the soul waits. Many of us were handed a toolkit and not a throne. We learned shortcuts and apps. We memorized strategies and theories. We stacked habits like boxes in a garage that never gets organized, and we were told that more would finally become enough. The nervous system adapted to constant alerts and called it normal. The breath grew thin and called it productivity. The heart learned to nod while it quietly said no. That is not failure. That is training. A life trained to react forgets how to rule, and the cost is a success that looks impressive from a distance and feels hollow up close. Solomon's wisdom walks into this room with a gentle authority. It does not argue, it reveals. The order that lasts is always inside to outside. When impulses find a governor, projects receive a king. When the inner world steadies, the outer world stops resisting so fiercely. The crown fits only after the heart sits on the throne. There is nothing glamorous about this, which is why it is rarely marketed, yet its power is difficult to overstate. A governed spirit does not erase emotion. It appoints emotion to its rightful seat, so that fear can warn without ruling, so that desire can inspire without misleading, so that anger can name injustice without burning down the house that needs repair. This inner throne is not made of pride or perfection. It is built of attention, breath, and principle. Emotional neuroscience quietly agrees. When attention returns to the body, when breath lengthens, the alarms that live in the older parts of the brain loosen their grip, and the wiser regions regain voice and choose calmly. The distance between an impulse and an action becomes a small meadow rather than a hair trigger. In that meadow, options appear. In that meadow, a person remembers the kind of story they are writing. Spiritual language would call this a heart at rest. Scientific language would call it regulation. Wisdom calls it rule. There is a simple rhythm many discover when they begin to live from this seat. The first urge that shouts across the morning is not obeyed immediately. A brief delay opens a window for clarity and for care, and the day no longer begins with surrender to the loudest craving. Over time, those small pauses teach the nervous system that it is safe to wait, safe to choose, safe to act from principle rather than panic. The difference seems minor in one moment and immense over a month. The mind that once lunged forward learns to stand, look, and then step. The scattered energy that once leaked into 10 directions gathers itself and travels as one stream. Close to this rhythm is another practice that preserves peace in costly moments. Before a consequential choice, time is given to name what was stirred, to remember who is in charge within, to reconnect action to value. Some write a brief note to themselves, others simply pause with honesty, yet the effect is similar. Heat that would have hijacked the day becomes information that guides the day. Temper becomes a messenger rather than a master. 5 minutes that once felt wasteful become 5 minutes that invest in the rest of the week. The choice that emerges carries less regret because it grew in the shade of reflection rather than the flash of reaction. The inner throne also requires the clarity of non-negotiables. These are not rigid walls that make life small. They are the pillars that let a palace carry weight. Integrity before convenience, diligence before drama, counsel before commitment, spoken simply, lived quietly, reviewed like a gardener tending the same faithful ground. When decisions pass through these pillars, outcomes stop feeling like roulette. The heart trusts its own path again, because the path is no longer paved by mood. The soul that once called randomness fate begins to recognize cause and effect, seed and season, sowing and reaping, and it relaxes into the predictability of wisdom. The body tells the truth about all of this. Notice how the jaw loosens when a choice aligns with a value. Notice how the shoulders soften when a pause protects you from an old pattern. Notice how breath returns when you decide from a place of worth rather than a fear of being left behind. The body celebrates governance with small physical signs of relief. These signals are not sentimental. They are data. They are the nervous system reporting that the kingdom within is no longer under a coup. As this state becomes more common, the hours take on a different texture. They feel less like sand and more like soil. For many, this shift begins in the smallest places. The first message that begs for instant reply is gently allowed to wait. The first scroll that lures the thumb is allowed to pass by. The first spark of irritation is named and held instead of thrown across a conversation. None of this is dramatic. All of this is decisive. Each small restraint is a vote for who sits in the chair. Each small restraint is also a kindness to the future self who will live inside the results. What once felt like deprivation begins to feel like dignity because the ability to choose the better thing is the essence of freedom. There is an effect that flows outward. With surprising speed, projects that once felt heavy begin to move because the person moving them is centered. Conversations that once turned sharp soften because the speaker is no longer driven to win the moment at the expense of the relationship. The day, which used to feel like a river that carried you, becomes a river you can steer. You sense the difference between urgency that is true and urgency that is noise. You sense the difference between an invitation that aligns with your pillars and a temptation that would quietly dismantle them. Discernment stops sounding mystical and starts feeling practical. This chapter could be named A Return to Rightful Order. A schedule without a king will always gossip about control while living under chaos. A schedule with a king does not have to brag. It simply serves. Tasks line up because values lead them. Commitments match capacity because ego is not driving the pen. Relationships breathe because there is room for honesty without the punishment of impulsive heat. Results arrive because the roots were watered rather than the leaves painted. What changes is not only what you do, but the person who is doing it. The atmosphere of your life shifts from pressure to presence, from performance to stewardship, from frantic to faithful. The inner throne is not a fantasy. It is a daily seat that waits inside each morning and asks a quiet question: who will rule this day? The answer is not shouted. It is lived. It is lived in the pauses that protect you. It is lived in the pillars that hold you. It is lived in the breath that calms you. It is lived in the names others give you when they realize you are the same person on the inside that you appear to be on the outside. The more this becomes true, the more your schedule becomes a reflection and not a replacement for your soul. And the more your success feels like something you can keep because it was built at the pace of wisdom and not at the speed of panic. When the heart sits, the schedule obeys. When the heart sits, emotions contribute without taking command. When the heart sits, the mind becomes a council rather than a courtroom. And when the heart sits, the work of your hands carries a different weight in the world. This is how authority grows without noise. This is how momentum returns without cruelty. This is how a life that once felt scattered begins to gather itself, day by modest day, into something that can be trusted. The inner throne is not far away. It has been waiting with patience, as if it knew that when you were ready to sit, the door would open inward, and the room would already be prepared. There is a certain fatigue that arrives after a season of sprinting. The mind catalogues completed tasks like trophies on a shelf, yet the heart knows that trophies do not make a home. You feel the tug of something sturdier than speed, a humility that says intensity cannot replace architecture, and ambition cannot carry what only structure can hold. The day was full, the week was loud, the month was a blur, and still the outcomes feel strangely accidental. It is not for lack of effort. It is for lack of pillars. Solomon's wisdom blesses this realization with calm assurance. The wise build with laws of cause and effect, the way a patient mason lays stone upon stone. Paint can hide cracks for a moment. Pillars carry weight for a lifetime. The difference is not glamorous, which is why it is rare. Yet the difference decides whether tomorrow is predictable or chaotic, whether confidence grows or erodes. The soul is hungry for that predictability. The body relaxes when it finds it. The nervous system steadies when choices line up with unshakable values, and the mind begins to release the hypervigilance that constant improvisation demands. There is a hidden grief in living by mood. You wake strong and outcomes are bright. You wake weary and outcomes are dim. The weather inside becomes the weather of the day, and when the day belongs to feelings, the harvest belongs to chance. Solomon speaks softly into that grief and offers a quieter path. Principles outproduce intensity. Rules outlast adrenaline. A few simple pillars become a place where choices can rest. The relief is not dramatic, yet it is deep. Predictability returns, not in the sense of control over every outcome, but as a trustworthy cadence of sowing and reaping. Emotional neuroscience explains why this relief feels sacred. When values are clear, the brain spends less energy debating familiar temptations and more energy executing aligned actions. Decision fatigue recedes. The higher centers reclaim bandwidth from the alarms that ring when life is run on improvisation. In the body, this feels like breath that reaches further, shoulders that settle, a stomach that unties its quiet knot. In the mind, it feels like a room with windows open to morning air. In the soul, it feels like the return of dignity. Many lives change when a person names a small set of non-negotiables and treats them as living architecture. The exact words vary from person to person, yet the spirit remains the same. Integrity before convenience, diligence before drama, counsel before commitment. Kept humbly, reviewed regularly, applied gently, these quiet laws begin to do their patient work. A tempting offer arrives that would fracture alignment, and the pillar of integrity bows and says, "Not this way." A storm of feeling rises, and the pillar of diligence says, "Keep the course." A shiny opportunity knocks, and the pillar of counsel whispers, "Ask for another set of eyes." This is not rigidity. This is protection that preserves power for the right battles. There is a beauty in how these pillars transform ordinary hours. Meetings end on time because values guided the beginning. Agreements are clear because the person making them was not trying to be impressive. Money decisions carry less shame because they were not born from panic. The week stops feeling like a series of emergencies and begins to feel like a riverbed that knows where it is going. The heart trusts itself again because it watches itself choose the same good way even when the weather changes. Trust becomes internal first and then flows outward as a reputation that opens doors without the noise of self-promotion. One of the tender fruits of living by principles is the end of hostile self-talk. Without clear pillars, the mind argues with itself in every hallway. It shames the past and fears the future. With pillars, the conversation softens. You already decided who you are becoming. You already chose what matters most. You simply live that choice today and then again tomorrow. This gentle repetition is not boring. It is beautiful. It is the rhythm of a life that prefers wisdom to drama and harvest to spectacle. The spiritual language for this is faithfulness. The scientific language for this is consistency under clear constraints. The body calls it rest. Consider how counsel changes outcomes when it is built into the architecture rather than added as decoration. When the habit of seeking perspective is established before commitment, the ego breathes, the blind spot shrinks, the silent pressure to be the one with all the answers fades. People who love you become part of the structure that holds you, and you become the kind of person who is not easily thrown by flattery or fear. Over time, this posture shapes a name that others trust. A good name is not a slogan. It is the quiet echo of aligned choices, repeated until they form a melody others recognize. Solomon's image of a palace resting on pillars can live in very ordinary scenes. A parent pauses long enough to answer a child with presence rather than noise. A leader pauses long enough to honor a promise when it would be easier to choose expedience. An artist pauses long enough to finish the work that matters rather than chase a trend that will fade by evening. These small scenes appear unremarkable, yet they are architectural. They are the stone on stone that keeps a house standing when wind arrives. There is a particular peace that lands in a home where pillars are honored. People know what to expect. Decisions arrive without sharp edges. Rooms feel safe for honest words. The pace slows to something human, while results become strangely more reliable. The nervous system learns that safety is not found in controlling everything, but in aligning with a few truths that do not move. And because they do not move, you can. You can move toward the right work with less hesitation. You can move through conflict without losing yourself. You can move away from what looks dazzling and does not match your design. Architecture is patient. Ambition is loud. Architecture is faithful. Ambition is restless. Architecture is teachable. Ambition is brittle. When the two walk together, ambition learns to serve and not to rule. It becomes energy that obeys wisdom and not the other way around. In this arrangement, your results stop looking like a roller coaster. They begin to resemble a field in season, a harvest that may rise and fall with weather, yet remains dependable, because the farmer respects the laws of rain and soil. This predictability is not dull, it is deeply creative. It frees the mind to design and to love and to build, because it is no longer busy covering for the chaos of yesterday. A life guided by principles will sometimes look slow to those who only read headlines. The wise do not mind. They are not after quick applause, they are after longevity. They are after a kind of success that lets them sleep at night and smile in the morning. They measure wealth in trust and usefulness, as much as in numbers. Over years, this posture compounds. Opportunities begin to seek the person whose house is not only beautiful, but sound. People request the presence of those who do not wobble under pressure. Influence grows because reliability is magnetic. When you look back after a season of living this way, you may notice that outcomes feel less like luck and more like a path that makes sense. You may notice that disappointment visits but does not dominate. You may notice that your work carries a weight it did not carry before, and that weight is not heaviness, but credibility. This is what it means for results to become predictable, not guaranteed. Predictable. When a person sows the same wise seeds into the same trustworthy soil, harvest becomes a friend that knows the way home. Paint will always promise speed and applause. Pillars will always promise strength and shelter. Solomon would nudge the heart toward the latter. Build where strength lives. Build where storms do not frighten you into unmaking your own house. Build where your name can stand longer than your latest project. When the day comes that your life must carry someone else for a while, as every good life must, you will be grateful for the quiet architecture that made room for that love without collapsing the roof. And when that day passes and laughter returns, you will keep building, stone upon stone, guided by principles that make success not an accident, but a faithful companion. There is a moment every skilled person meets when the room stays quiet, even though the resume speaks loudly. You have put in the hours, earned the knowledge, carried the weight, and still the door barely opens. It feels unfair. It feels confusing. A knot forms beneath the ribcage where hope and fatigue meet. In that tender place, a gentler truth begins to surface. Competence is essential, yet it is not the gate. The gate is trust. The gate is the memory others hold of how their life felt when you were near it. The gate is the echo of your name when you are not in the room. Solomon's wisdom sits with that ache and names what is often missed. Skill can reach the door. Character carries the key. Favor is not flattery and not luck. Favor is the compound interest of kept promises, of quiet reliability, of humility that can hear hard words without growing hard. A good name becomes a key that turns locks others have knocked upon for years. This is not mystical in the way of fairy tales. It is mystical in the way soil turns seed into sustenance. Invisible work, visible harvest. The body knows when trust is present. Breathing slows, shoulders ease, the mind stops bracing for impact. Emotional neuroscience has language for this. Predictability reduces threat signals. Reliability rewires expectation. Safety frees the brain to solve rather than to defend. When a person has earned that kind of presence, rooms change before they speak. People lower armor. Decisions become clearer. Work flows with fewer invisible costs. What money buys in speed, favor buys in access, and patience and grace when things do not go as planned. There is a quiet discipline that builds this invisible currency. It is not the loud promise that tries to impress. It is the small commitment that is kept without announcement. It is honoring time as if it were borrowed, because it always is. It is telling the truth while holding dignity on both sides of the conversation. It is hearing a concern early rather than protecting ego late. Each small act leaves a residue in the memory of others. Over days, that residue becomes a reputation. Over years, that reputation becomes a gravity that draws good work and good people into orbit. You may remember a season when your name felt heavier in the best way. Someone recommended you when you did not know they were watching. Someone chose you because a friend told a simple story. She said you showed up early and left the place better. He said you said the difficult thing, and somehow The room felt safer. They did not mention an award. They remembered a presence that eased the nervous system, that kept the lights of trust on, that made collaboration feel like rest instead of risk. This is favor at work, the quiet wind at your back. There is an art to correcting mistakes that multiplies this currency. When a promise bends under pressure, honesty mends it faster than defense. When outcomes fall short, humility reaches out before the silence hardens into suspicion. The moment you ask for a clearer view of your blind spot, something holy happens. You honor the person in front of you more than you protect your image. The nervous system of the relationship relaxes. The door that was beginning to close opens again because it recognizes a spirit that values truth over pride. Solomon prized this posture because he understood how fragile relationships are when built on performance alone. Talent can attract attention. Trust sustains it. Money can complete a transaction. Reputation invites a future. The wise invest in the kind of wealth that remains when the market turns and the headlines shift. They protect their name the way a gardener protects roots, not with fear, with consistency, with an eye for the long season, with the patience to let the echo of good choices travel further than a slogan ever could. There is a quiet ledger that lives inside a person who takes this seriously. Not a ledger written to shame, but to remember what was promised, what was delivered, where amends were made, where gratitude was given, where counsel was sought before conclusions were drawn. The point is not to be perfect. The point is to be faithful. Faithfulness composes a song that others begin to hum when they speak your name. The melody is simple. You can count on this one. The music opens gates without noise. The science of bonding gives this melody a practical frame. Consistent signals of care and competence lower uncertainty and strengthen affiliation. People begin to predict your behavior with warmth rather than with worry. They spend less energy guarding themselves when you are near. That surplus energy becomes collaboration. Collaboration becomes outcomes. Outcomes become stories told around tables you would not have reached without the trust that carried your name ahead of you. The wise do not take this lightly. They steward it as a sacred charge. You may have known someone whose gifts were dazzling and whose name brought a chill. Their work glowed and their presence drained. Opportunities arrived and then vanished because the hidden cost was too high. This contrast is painful to watch. It is also instructive. Skill without a good name spends influence faster than it earns it. Skill with a good name multiplies influence in quiet ways that often look slow until they suddenly look unstoppable. This is the math of favor. It compounds faster than money because it operates inside the human heart where loyalty is born. A life shaped by this understanding begins to see doors differently. The question shifts from how quickly can I get in to how deeply can I be trusted? The second question may move slower at first. It does not move alone. It brings with it people who want you to win because your winning never required their losing. It brings with it second chances when plans stumble. It brings with it the kind of patience that lets excellence mature without the corrosion of panic. In this way, favor becomes a shelter. It keeps the weather off the work long enough for the work to bloom. The image that lingers is simple and strong. A good name feels like a key in the palm. It is light and heavy at once. Light in the hand because it was forged through many small choices rather than one dramatic moment. Heavy in meaning because it opens gates that effort alone could not move. When that key turns, you hear a click that echoes back through years of quiet integrity, back through evenings when you told the truth though it cost you, back through mornings when you showed up though no one was counting. The sound is soft, the result is powerful. This is the invisible currency that Solomon lifts into the light. It is not for sale. It is freely given by those who have watched you long enough to believe you will still be the same person when the lights are bright and when they are not. When this currency begins to flow, you do not have to push your way through every gate. Some gates will open because your name arrived before you did. Some gates will open because your presence lowers the heart rate of a room. Some gates will open because the wise love to partner with what is steady and true. As this chapter settles, notice what rises. Perhaps a memory of a promise you kept when it was costly. Perhaps the face of someone whose trust changed your path. Perhaps a quiet resolve to become the kind of presence that people rest in rather than brace against. These are small beginnings, and they are more than enough. Favor will meet them in season. Reputation will give them a voice. And the work of your hands will be carried by a wind you cannot buy yet can clearly feel. A wind that knows your name and calls it a key. There is a rhythm in the world that does not advertise itself. It moves like a quiet metronome beneath the noise of big launches and bold announcements. This rhythm belongs to the humble and the faithful. It belongs to the ones who choose a steady path rather than a dramatic leap. Solomon nodded toward this rhythm when he watched the ant gather in season. He saw a wisdom hidden in small, timed effort. A wisdom that does not wear a cape, yet somehow carries winters without fear. The lesson feels almost too gentle for an age that worships the spectacular, and perhaps that is why it remains a secret to many who burn fast and fade early. The body recognizes this wisdom before the mind agrees. Grand gestures spike adrenaline and then leave the nervous system empty. The crash arrives. The willpower evaporates. The story begins again with another heroic push. Emotional neuroscience whispers a calmer strategy. The brain prefers reliable cues and modest loads it can carry without entering survival mode. When effort arrives in consistent measures, stress signals soften, attention deepens, memory strengthens, and the work begins to stack rather than scatter. What once felt like a fight turns into a gentle procession of hours that remember where they are going. The ant does not despise smallness. The ant does not argue with time. Grain by grain, the storehouse fills, and there is no headline for that miracle, even though it saves a life when the cold turns sharp. This image quiets the soul because it rescues success from the theater of urgency. It returns success to the craft of ordinary days. A short window of focused labor, honored with grace and regularity, becomes the kind of power that needs no applause to be real. The small effort is not a compromise. It is a seed. It is a covenant with a future that arrives a little at a time until it stands at the door fully grown. Many hearts resist this because they carry the memory of sprints that once worked. A season of intense effort produced a burst of results, and the burst felt like proof. Yet the cost came due later in ways that were difficult to pay. Sleep thinned, joy dimmed, relationships bent under the weight of a pace that made no room for tenderness. The work survived, but the worker grew hollow. That is not failure, that is a signal. The soul was not designed for permanent crisis. Authority arrives from faithfulness, not from frenzy. The ant's slow march is not a denial of ambition. It is ambition discipled by wisdom. There is an art to how time is held within this approach. A small daily span becomes sacred ground. It is not negotiated with moods. It is not thrown to the loudest alarm. It is guarded the way a farmer guards the morning when the soil is soft and the air is kind. The mind learns that this window will be kept. The body learns that this window will not be violent. Together, they begin to anticipate the work rather than dread it. The starting comes easier. The staying grows possible. The finishing becomes a habit rather than a rare event reserved for desperate times. The fruit of this rhythm appears quietly at first. One page becomes a few pages, and then a manuscript appears where there used to be an intention. One practice session becomes many, and then a competence appears where there used to be a wish. One call becomes a steady pipeline, and then provision appears where there used to be anxiety. Outsiders call it luck. The wise know it as compounding. Effort that arrives at the same door every day is greeted like a friend, invited inside, and joined by yesterday's effort and last week's effort and the efforts of a season. Together they build what a single heroic burst cannot keep. Solomon's image of seasons deepens this truth. There is a time to gather and a time to rest, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to expand and a time to hold. Small timed diligence honors this cadence. It moves with the grain of reality rather than against it. It respects the body's need for recovery. It respects the mind's need for rhythm. It respects the soul's need for meaning. The work becomes sustainable because it agrees with how life actually unfolds. In this agreement, results begin to feel trustworthy rather than accidental. There is a tenderness in how this way shields a person from shame. When effort is defined by dramatic surges, the inevitable quiet days feel like moral failure. When effort is defined by a humane daily portion, a quiet day simply becomes part of the song. A missed window does not become a verdict. It becomes a gentle return the next day without the poison of self-contempt. The rule that quietly forms is simple and kind. Falling happens. Rising happens again. The cadence continues. Faithfulness resumes. The harvest remains on schedule because the schedule was never powered by violence. The nervous system reports these changes in small physical languages. The breath reaches further without being forced. The jaw loosens. The eyes soften. The shoulders stop trying to live behind the ears. The body understands that the work will not hurt it, and so it offers deeper focus. The mind, freed from the theater of constant restarts, begins to notice patterns and refine methods. The soul, no longer pressed to prove itself in loud ways, begins to enjoy the work for its own sake. Joy returns not as a party, but as a warmth that lingers while the hands move. In the presence of this rhythm, opportunities start to align. People learn that you arrive when you say you will, and that you bring the same steady presence whether the weather is bright or grey. Doors stay open longer. Partners lean in further. The quiet reputation that formed in the earlier chapter becomes even stronger now because reliability has a calendar beneath it. Favor wraps itself around diligence, and the two walk together like old friends, turning effort into influence without spectacle. The life that once felt like a sequence of emergencies begins to feel like a season of stewardship. The image that stays with many is simple: a granary filling a little each day, a path wearing smooth under faithful feet, a tree ring added in silence while storms pass overhead. None of this looks impressive in the moment, yet each moment holds the weight of a future that will not be shaken. The ant continues. The ant continues. The ant continues. The repetition becomes a prayer, and the prayer becomes a power. When winter finally arrives with its sharp winds, the small doors of the storehouse swing open, and there is enough. This is the gift of the ant's wisdom. It rescues gifted people from the addiction to extremes. It rescues tender hearts from the shame of inconsistency by offering a cadence that fits the shape of a human life. It rescues great work from the ruins of burnout by building it through modest portions that the body can bless. And in rescuing these things, it brings back something even greater. It brings back trust. Trust in the work, trust in yourself, trust in the seasons, trust that what is planted with care and watered with patience will stand, grain by grain, into a strength that does not need to shout to be sure. When this chapter settles in the heart, the day takes on a different tone. There is less rush and more resolve. There is less panic and more presence. There is less hunger for the dramatic and more affection for the faithful. You sense again that authority does not come from a single spectacle. It comes from 1,000 quiet agreements with the better way. The ant keeps walking, the storehouse keeps filling, the season keeps turning, and a life that once felt scattered begins to gather itself into something that can be trusted, even when the wind rises. The gatekeeper's yes. Discernment is wealth protection. There comes a season when abundance disguises itself as pressure. Invitations arrive from every direction, and each one carries a glow that flatters the ego and stirs the pulse. To the tired heart, every door looks like rescue. To the ambitious mind, every door looks like duty. In that swirl, a different wisdom begins to whisper. Not every open gate is your gate. Not every good path belongs to your feet. The soul that has learned to govern within now learns to guard what it governs. This guard does not shout, it listens. It protects value with a quiet strength that refuses to spend a life on what does not fit its design. Solomon knew how costly a careless yes can become. He watched how scattered loyalties weaken a city and how unguarded walls invite gentle theft. Success leaks not only through large mistakes, it leaks through a steady drip of almost right choices that slowly dilute the power of the best one. The image is simple and sobering. A city with strong walls can trade safely. A life without gates leaks treasure. Discernment becomes the gatekeeper that stands in the doorway of your hours and asks questions that save you from wasting yourself on what will not bear your weight. The body often signals the difference before the mind explains it. The shoulders lift when an offer clashes with quiet values. The stomach tightens when a commitment bends the pillars named in earlier days. The jaw hardens when the pace violates the humane rhythm that keeps you whole. Emotional neuroscience names these signs as data rather than drama. They are early alerts from a system that remembers alignment. When those alerts are honored, the inner world settles. When they are ignored, the cost collects interest. Over time, that interest becomes exhaustion that no success can soothe. Discernment has a simple way of speaking. It will ask two gentle questions before a yes leaves the mouth. Does this fit the principles that hold my life? Does this fit the season I am standing in? When the first answer is no, no amount of charm can turn it into wisdom. When the second answer is no, no amount of fear can make it safe. These questions appear softer than the loud voice of opportunity. They carry more authority. They allow good things to remain good without becoming gods. They keep the soul available to the work it was actually built to carry. There is grief in this kind of clarity because every no has a face. People will misunderstand. Some will take distance. There will be days when the chosen path looks quiet, while another path looks dazzling. Solomon's wisdom makes room for that ache and still holds the line. Restraint creates reach. Selectivity concentrates power. When energy is not scattered, it gathers. When focus is not diluted, it deepens. When commitments match capacity, they mature into credibility rather than collapse into apology. The short term may frown, the long-term smiles. Notice how reputation and favor join discernment in this work. A trusted name is difficult to carry when yes arrives too easily. Promises become thin, presence becomes rushed, listening loses its warmth. People feel the difference even when words sound the same. A single careful no often protects 100 future yes answers that will be given with strength and joy. In this way, a guarded gate is an act of generosity. It prevents the quiet theft of half-hearted agreements that take more than they bring. The nervous system breathes differently when gates are honored. Mornings begin without dread because the day is not overbooked. Evenings end without resentment because attention was not bartered away. The mind stops living in triage and returns to design. The body releases its hidden armor because it trusts that someone kind is managing the door. Creativity grows in this climate. Relationships deepen. Work regains the texture of craftsmanship. What looked like a restriction reveals itself as a spaciousness that was missing all along. There are stories that every wise life can tell about opportunities declined that later proved to be expensive disguises. They would have required a self too divided to survive. They would have spent the name that had taken years to earn. They would have scattered the schedule until nothing felt sacred. The gatekeeper's yes carries an awareness of these possibilities. It listens beyond flattery and beyond fear. It hears the question beneath the question. What will this ask of my heart? What will this take from my pillars? What will this add to my harvest when the season turns? This way of choosing is not cold, it is tender. It honors the giver by telling the truth about capacity. It honors the work by refusing to promise what cannot be delivered with excellence. It honors the self by remembering that useful lives are made of presence and not of posturing. Sometimes the answer becomes not now and not like this and not at this cost. Sometimes the answer becomes yes, with conditions that protect the very qualities that made the invitation arrive in the first place. Discernment also knows when a door is small and still meant to be entered. The body relaxes, the mind brightens. The face of fear shrinks to a size that courage can hold. The principles are intact, and the season is ready. This yes carries peace even when risk is real. It carries energy even when effort will be heavy. It carries dignity because it does not betray the quiet agreements that give life its coherence. When this yes is spoken, it does not need to be defended. Its integrity is obvious to those who can see. Over time, a life shaped by this gatekeeping begins to accumulate an invisible wealth. Attention becomes a resource that can be spent on what matters. Time becomes a friend rather than a pursuer. Money behaves differently under the care of a soul that refuses to purchase status at the price of sanity. The people around such a life feel safer. They know the person in front of them will not trade integrity for access. They know that yes means yes. They know that no is not punishment, it is alignment. There is a common fear that saying no will close too many doors. Experience teaches a kinder lesson. The doors that close were never built to hold you. The doors that remain keep their hinges because you were not reckless with them. New doors open that would have stayed hidden from a scattered life. You become the kind of person who can be entrusted with large things because you did not betray yourself for small ones. The city within stays strong. The gates do their quiet work. Wealth in all its meanings is guarded and grows. As this chapter rests in the heart, a final image lingers. A watchman stands at the gate of a well-loved city at dawn. The air is cool. The roads lead in every direction. The watchman hears the steps of travelers and the songs of merchants and the promises of messengers. He smiles and speaks with kindness, and sometimes he opens the gate and sometimes he does not. He is not hard. He is faithful. He serves the city he loves by remembering what it is worth. In the same way, the soul that has learned to rule now learns to guard. It protects what has been built. It protects what is becoming. And in that protection, success stops leaking and begins to last. The path has become clear in a way that does not need to raise its voice. Inside before outside. Pillars before paint. Favor before finance. The ant's steady path before the loud leap. Guarded gates so the harvest is not lost by quiet leaks. This is not a slogan. It is a way of moving that lets the soul remain whole while the work grows strong. The body relaxes into it. The breath deepens. The mind begins to trust that wisdom is not against desire. It is the shape that lets desire last. Look back for a moment and notice the arc. The inner throne returned leadership to the place where choices are born. Architecture replaced improvisation and turned effort into structure. Favor rose from the soil of a good name and carried the work where money often fails. The small-time diligence of the ant restored momentum without cruelty. The gatekeeper's yes protected wealth in every meaning of the word. Together, these pillars form a single doorway. Step through, and the same life begins to feel different. Less noise, more knowing. Less panic, more presence. The week that follows meets you like a friend. The opening day invites a gentle delay between impulse and action, so leadership can breathe before the schedule makes its claim. A quiet temper review brings light to the places where heat once ruled, and the heart remembers that peace is not passive, it is power at rest. The following day asks for the writing of house rules that hold the roof when weather changes, and choices meet those rules like guests who respect the home they enter. The next sunrise brings the trust ledger to life, not as punishment, but as memory, so that promises become music and the name attached to them grows warm in the minds of others. Midway through the week, a small span of focused work takes its rightful seat and returns each day like a friend who keeps the same kind hour. The body recognizes the kindness and brings deeper attention without being forced. After that, discernment stands at the threshold of opportunity and listens for alignment with principles and season, allowing the yes that carries peace and the no that protects dignity. Near the end, a day of weaving pulls the threads together, letting insights speak to one another until the pattern becomes visible, and then a closing day arrives that favors silence and counsel, letting stillness soften the ground while a trusted voice offers a line you had not yet seen. None of this shouts, All of this accumulates. The nervous system learns safety and offers clarity in return. The mind learns rhythm and offers creativity in return. The heart learns truth and offers tenderness in return. What once felt like a scramble begins to resemble a craft. What once felt far away begins to feel inevitable because it is now built on causes that lead to their natural effects. In this place, effort feels fruitful. Relationships feel cleaner, and success feels like something that blesses rather than consumes. There is a question that waits at the edge of this closing, and it wants to be heard in the quiet voice that loves you. If only one wise pillar were lived with unwavering kindness for a single long stretch of days, which one would multiply your life the fastest? Let the answer rise without hurry. Trust the body when it settles. Listen for the word that brings both strength and peace. Carry one final picture as you rise. The city within is lit by a soft morning. The watchman stands at the gate with a calm face. The market wakes. The artisans bring their work. A steady river of people moves along streets built on good stone. Above it all, a throne sits where it belonged all along. There is no rush to prove anything today. There is only a quiet governance that keeps its promises, guards its gates, honors its seasons, and welcomes favor as if it were weather set free by wisdom. Inside to outside, pillars before paint, a hidden lever that turns from within and makes the door open without strain.